There is a plant that humanity has been eating for thousands of years, yet in modern America, it is officially called a poisonous berry. And this is not a legend, not a rare exotic shrub, and not a forgotten jungle herb. It is the common black nightshade, a plant that grows in gardens, along fields, on vacant lots, and in yards across Europe, Asia, Africa, and North America. The most surprising thing is not that it is edible, but that more than 1 billion people regularly include it in their diet, while another part of the world has spent decades trying to eradicate it. The story begins long before the internet, pharmacology, and even universities. The plant was mentioned by Theophrastus, a student of Aristotle who is often called the first botanist. He described a group of plants under the name strychnos, and judging by historians of science, Warbitsiperstit asturiensicanes, already distinguished forms that could be eaten from those that caused poisoning. In other words, the basic knowledge that among nightshades there are edible species existed more than 2,000 years ago. But later, as European botany developed, this distinction gradually blurred because another relative existed nearby, belladonna, Atropa belladonna, a truly powerful poison. The names became confused, and with them the ideas about danger. And here the real contradiction begins. While European reference books became increasingly cautious, in the Mediterranean, Africa, and India, the plant never disappeared from the kitchen. On the Greek island of Ikaria, where longevity researchers noted an unusually high percentage of people over 90, locals calmly prepare the so-called horta, a mixture of wild greens. Among them, nightshade often appears. It is gathered not as medicine, but as an ordinary vegetable, boiled, the water drained, seasoned with olive oil and lemon, and served as naturally as spinach would be in another country. Similar traditions exist much farther away as well. In Kenya, it is grown not only in household plots but also on farms, sold in markets and supermarkets under local names. And some agronomists have even said that the older generation considered these leaves food of strength after hard labor. In southern India, the berries are dried and added to dishes, and in household advice, they were often mentioned as a home remedy for inflammation in the mouth. In Indonesia, the leaves are sometimes eaten fresh in traditional salads. These traditions arose independently, in different cultures and climates, and they were united by one thing. The plant was not considered exotic. It was considered ordinary food. And here 20th century science enters the stage. When chemists began testing ripe berries, some studies showed extremely low levels of alkaloids, and sometimes they were practically undetectable. At the same time, botanists had long known that green, unripe berries do indeed contain glycoalkaloids. Similar substances are also found in green potatoes. Thus, a more precise picture emerged. Not all parts of the plant are equally safe, and much depends on ripeness and preparation. But the public perception had already taken hold. If it is related to belladonna, it must be dangerous. At the same time, in agriculture, the plant acquired a different reputation. Black nightshade proved to be a remarkably hardy weed. It quickly occupies disturbed soil, competes with soybeans, corn, and cotton, and can noticeably reduce yields. For this reason, herbicides began to be actively used against it, and agricultural services published warnings for farmers. Gradually, two different arguments, toxicological caution and the agricultural fight against weeds, merged into a single everyday belief. The plant was not merely undesirable, but dangerous. Interestingly, entirely different data were appearing in parallel. In laboratory work, researchers noted a high mineral content in the leaves, especially calcium and vitamin A, and some groups of scientists studied substances isolated from the plant in cell cultures, testing their effects on cancer cell lines. Such experiments do not mean a ready-made medicine, but they are usually conducted only with biologically active plants. And the very fact of scientific laboratory interest shows that this is not a meaningless weed. An unusual situation emerged. In some countries, the plant was considered part of the traditional diet. In others, an object of eradication. And in the scientific community, a subject of cautious study. Moreover, all three positions did not arise simultaneously, but in layers, like geological strata. First came ancient culinary practice, then botanical confusion with a poisonous relative, then the agricultural war on a weed, and only afterward an attempt to understand anew what kind of plant it actually is. And if you look at it calmly, it becomes clear that the main conflict here is not between truth and myth. The conflict is between experience and classification. For thousands of years, people determined safety through preparation practices, boiling, draining the water, using young leaves and ripe berries. Scientific reference books determined safety through species relationships. Agriculture determined value through crop yield. Three different questions received the same answer, and everything became confused because of it. The story becomes even more interesting because when longevity researchers began studying regions with unusual life expectancy, they looked for rare foods, complex recipes, or secret additives. Instead, they found a simple pattern: plenty of greens, olive oil, legumes, moderation in eating, and plants that literally grow underfoot. Among them, again and again, appeared that same nightshade, which another part of the world considered dangerous. And here arises the question for which this story is worth hearing at all. How did it happen that the same plant in different cultures became simultaneously a symbol of health, a warning, and an object of agricultural warfare? And which of these is actually closer to reality? We will examine further. Now for the most important part. Not the history, not legends, and not other people's opinions. Let's finally figure out what is actually happening in this plant from the human body's perspective, because this is usually where fear comes from. Black nightshade is neither a harmless herb nor a deadly poison. It is a chemically active plant, and that is an entirely different category. Its tissues contain glycoalkaloids, substances that plants produce to protect themselves from insects and animals. Similar compounds exist in all nightshades, potatoes, eggplants, tomatoes. This is why green potatoes taste bitter and can cause nausea. The mechanism is the same. The key is distribution. Most of these substances are found in unripe green berries, old tough leaves, and plants that have endured drought or damage. Fewer are present in young leaves, and even less in fully ripe blackberries. This is not speculation. Botanists have repeatedly noted that the concentration drops sharply as the fruit matures. This is why traditional cuisines almost always use either young greens after boiling or fully black, soft berries. What happens if a person eats a large amount of raw plant? Glycoalkaloids irritate the mucous membranes and the nervous system. Symptoms usually include bitterness in the mouth, burning in the throat, nausea, vomiting, weakness, and sometimes dizziness. Severe cases are rare but have been described, most often in children, because their lower body weight results in a relatively higher dose. Here's the critical point. Most of these poisonings occurred either due to green berries or confusion with other nightshades. Why is boiling mentioned so often in traditional practices? Not out of superstition. Glycoalkaloids partially leach into water. When the leaves are boiled and the water discarded, the concentration decreases significantly. That is why recipes from different countries are surprisingly similar. First boil, then remove the water, then add fat, usually oil. Fat does not neutralize the toxins, but it makes the dish easier on the stomach, while acids like lemon or vinegar improve the flavor and reduce bitterness, which signals the presence of the plant's protective compounds. Now for the important confusion that gave nightshade its reputation. There is another plant, belladonna, Atropa belladonna. This is no food plant, but a truly potent poison with alkaloids of the atropine group. They act differently: pupil dilation, dry mouth, rapid heartbeat, mental confusion. Externally, the berries resemble black nightshade, and older accounts often mix the name nightshade for different species. For someone without botanical knowledge, it looked like the same bush. In reality, they are different genera of plants. A significant part of the historical fear arose precisely from this observational error. Another issue is dosage. In toxicology, almost everything is determined by amount. Even ordinary table salt can be dangerous in huge doses, and plants are no exception. The problem with nightshade is not the mere presence of glycoalkaloids, but their concentration. Small amounts after proper preparation are usually tolerated by the body, but large amounts of raw material are not. This is why traditional cultures never ate it like handfuls of forest berries, but treated it as a vegetable that needed cooking. Who should be especially cautious? Typically, advice is given to pregnant women, small children, and people sensitive to nightshades. Possible interactions with sedatives and some blood sugar-affecting medications have also been noted, because biologically active compounds can amplify or reduce the effects of drugs. This does not mean the plant will necessarily cause a problem, but these are the safety recommendations. Now about the beneficial properties, and here it is important not to go to extremes. The leaves do indeed contain minerals and vitamins, as with many dark green plants. Certain laboratories have studied compounds isolated from it on cell cultures, including tumor lines, because plants with protective chemicals often attract pharmacologists. But a lab experiment on cells is not a medicine for humans. It only shows that the plant's biology is more complex than a weed. And here we arrive at reality. The plant is not magical, forbidden, or absolutely safe. It is ordinary in nature. When properly identified and prepared, it has been consumed for centuries. When misused or overconsumed, it can cause poisoning. American warnings arose primarily to protect against species confusion and accidental ingestion by children, while agriculture fought it due to competition with crops. These two factors overlapped and created the image of a dangerous berry. In essence, the story of nightshade is not so much the story of a plant, as it is the story of how knowledge diverges. Folk practice relies on preparation experience, science relies on classification, and everyday memory relies on caution. When these were mixed, a myth arose that became stronger than explanation. Therefore, the main takeaway is not to rush to seek out this plant or, conversely, to fear it hysterically. The main point is to understand the distinction, because fear usually arises where details are lost. And it is precisely the details that show. This is neither legendary poison nor miracle medicine, but simply another member of the complex plant world, which people in different parts of the globe have learned to use in different ways.